All right, I've started recording this. And if folks know how to do reactions, if you want to give me maybe a thumbs up if you have any experience with drones so far, just so we can kind of gauge who was here and what kind of questions. I see 1 thumbs up so far, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, good. So some people who have some experience. What about what's those? Oh, and another one. What about if you want to give me like the birthday explosion emoji if you're like a total newbie to drones, like are really here just to be like, help me figure out how to get started. What is this flying contraption in the sky? Cool. Yeah, I fall into that category myself as well. I put the experts in front of you, but I am definitely not one of them. Great. Well, that is very helpful to me. And with that, hopefully some folks will just keep joining us, and I can kind of keep reminding people if we have any issues with Zoom etiquette things, so I don't think we will, but with that, I will share my screen. Great. All right, so thank you so much for joining us today. This is the Drones and Riparian Planting and Restoration Q&A panel. So I'm going to introduce you to our drone experts in just a minute, but we have Danny Auerbach, Jason Schilling, and Amanda Stahl, who are going to be answering all of your questions today. And this event is brought to you by Populus, the Columbia Basin Riparian Planting Partnership, with support from Mid-Columbia Fisheries Enhancement Group and Yakima Basin Fish and Wildlife Recovery Board. My name is Tori, and I am on the Populus committee, and I also work for Mid-Columbia Fisheries Enhancement Group. So that is my role in all of this, is just sort of bringing people together and putting the experts in front of you. All right, so a little bit about who our drone experts are today. So we have Amanda Stahl from WSU. Amanda applies social ecological systems thinking to identify challenges and opportunities for shaping landscape conservation for multiple positive outcomes. Her current work focuses on enhancing environmental monitoring strategies by broadening access to technological advances such as cloud computing with free satellite images and the ability to collect UAV-based or drone images. Our next expert is Jason Schilling with Douglas Public Utilities District. Jason is a wildlife biologist with Douglas County PUD that has been using drones for 7 years to monitor restoration progress and gather fine-scale habitat attributes for natural resources management. Most recently, he has applied his UAV skills in providing point clouds and contours for engineering and monitoring projects at the utility. And last but certainly not least, we have Danny Auerbach, also from WSU. Danny is a PhD student studying the capabilities of drones in fisheries, more specifically looking at subsurface detection in riverine settings. He works with partners in Washington, Idaho, and Alaska to compare current methodologies and assess the feasibility of identifying and enumerating salmon and their reds, as well as look at environmental impacts on image quality from drones. And so that's a little bit about our experts. If Amanda, do you have anything to add a little bit more explicitly and about your work with drones currently that you want to add to that? Just to kind of say hi to everyone.
Thanks, Tori. I think I would say most of my experience with drones is in vegetation monitoring or habitat monitoring, and kind of on the research end of things. So if you're thinking about your questions, that maybe helps you direct to the right person.
Great. And Jason, anything you want to add? I think you're muted, Jason. I'm sorry.
Not really. I think that was enough information, really.
Great.
Yeah.
And Danny?
Yeah, in the same boat as Jason, but just kind of an overall drone nerd. So if you have questions on what to fly, feel free to ask.
Great. All right, so we've met our experts and just a little bit about sort of the format of what this workshop is going to look like. So thank you everybody for registering and for adding all of your questions and kind of topic ideas into the registration form. So the first part of this workshop, I pulled all of the most common topics and questions that people filled out during registration and kind of created like a structured Q&A. So I'll be reading off of that in the beginning. And a lot of that, there was a ton of interest in sort of getting started with drones, whether it's from like total beginner, don't even really know where to get started, or I have a drone, but kind of how should I use it kind of a thing. So that's the first kind of big chunk of this webinar. And after that is going to be a completely open Q&A where you can add any remaining questions that you have to the chat. You can direct them to our experts more specifically. And ask any questions, whether it be more on getting started or more complex questions if you have them on programs or the work our experts are doing or anything like that. And I also want to note that I do have somebody else, Merritt, shout out to Merritt from the Populus committee, who's going to be taking notes from our experts on this. And then we're going to kind of work with our experts to hopefully compile a really nice list of the programs, the drones, and the resources that we talk about today. And I will send that out at the end of this webinar to everybody who attended. So just keep an eye out for that. And of course, you're welcome to take your own notes, but hopefully this will kind of help provide you with something kind of visual to add to this as well that you can revert back to. All right. So with that, so getting started with drones. So a common question that we got, and any of our experts can jump in and answer this. You can all answer it, or one person if you just want to jump in. What can drones be used for in riparian restoration or conservation or monitoring? What is the purpose of using drones?
I'll jump in here. One of the simplest and a very effective and powerful way it can be used is by generating, you can use a drone to generate an orthophoto mosaic for different stages of your projects. That's how I kind of first got into this type of work, and it's simple. There's a bit of a learning curve, but I think it's a powerful way to detect changes, even just a visual way. If you don't want to quantify anything, it's a very useful thing to have in your restoration projects.
Thank you. Danny or Amanda, anything you want to add to that?
I guess I would add, maybe it's a little bit at the next level with a little bit more learning curve, but it is possible to quantify change. So to describe, but also measure and have numbers to report. It's possible to create either a pre or post project baseline and come back to it at the right time for whatever your study setting is. Also, it's possible, and I think Danny could elaborate on this even more, but there are many other types of data we can collect with drones, not just true color images. And it includes, if we take the right kinds of pictures at the right kinds of angles, we can actually build a model of the surface. And so you can get at plant heights, density, distribution in a quantitative way. We're working on some data we collected that we haven't finished writing up yet, but with accuracy estimates for how accurate we can get, but certainly accurate enough that you can be relating these to ground measurements of plant growth and that sort of thing, but also providing this continuous surface of measurements. That's something you wouldn't really be able to get at from the ground. So it can be a really nice way to complement ground-based monitoring.
Awesome, thank you. All right, and the next question, we had a lot of questions about how would one get certified? How, like, where do you even start with that? Like, what's the process for it? What kind of things do you learn in the certification process to fly a drone?
Yeah, so you need to get a Part 107 license through the FAA. And that's a test that you'll take, and then if you pass that test, then every 2 years you need to get a recurrent license, which the FAA has really streamlined. What will you learn? Hopefully a lot about airspace, where you can fly and where you can't fly. They do get into some sort of the aerodynamic aspects of drones, but mainly it's just safe practices if you get into accidents, when to report those accidents, kind of the rules there. So I think, Katie, this is a follow-up question. Yeah, that's a great question. So who needs to get the license? Correct me if I'm wrong, but any research or anything for profit, you need to get a license. But if you're just flying recreationally, so the ski resort flying, no, you don't need to get one, but you still need to be aware of the rules and regulations there. Jason, did you have something to add there?
No, I didn't. Yeah, it's gotten a lot easier. You used to have to take that test, the Part 107 test, in person, usually at some kind of flight school. But now you can do it all online, which is nice.
I think the first time you take it, you still need to take it in person. I might be
Oh, really?
wrong about that, but I think so. I think it's just the renewal that we can do online.
Oh, that's good to know.
And then there are online prep courses you can take to get you ready for it. You need to be able to read the aeronautical charts and know all the safety and all that.
I just posted a really good tutorial that I used when I did my research 2 years ago. I think this guy's a photographer, but he's really thorough in his online. It's a couple hours long, and it's really worthwhile to watch if you're going to take the test. It helped me out a lot.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I see, Amanda, you also posted a link in the chat as well, which was the next question, which is, are there like resources or websites? But it seems like maybe those are some of the ones that come to mind initially for getting started or certified with drones.
Yeah, I'll just add that there are tons and tons of courses available online. I just do a Google search. Some of them are free, some of them you pay for. I think it just depends on your prior knowledge to the rules from the FAA on whether you need to pay or not. But there are so many resources online. So
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And we will add all links from our experts that are added here to the resource page that we send out, just so everybody knows. All right. Thank you, guys. That was really great. All right. So next section is, oops, did I skip one? There we go. I was gonna say, I think I skipped one. Equipment. So we had a lot of questions on, and I'm sure that this is kind of a rabbit hole we could go down, but what types of drones are there and what can they be used for?
I suppose I can take this one, seeing as my picture is the types of drones that you can use. So I'd say there's kind of 4 main types of drones that you can use. So there's a fixed wing, which is the picture in the top right. And these are long battery life, long distance drones that are fixed wing, right? So they can go a long way. They have a suite of sensors. There's limitations like takeoffs and landings and space required, but that's one. Then you have what are considered as enterprise drones or research drones that are developed that can hold a suite of sensors, multiple sensors. they're vertical takeoff and landing drones. They're not a hybrid. You're limited by batteries and therefore limited by how far you can go and how fast you can fly. But they're probably the most common drone you see in research. The bottom right there in my thing, if that's for you all as well, those are more consumer grade drones that are valuable in research, but you're limited in the sensors that you can put on them. Obviously, most of them come with a sensor already attached to them that are not transferable, but they're still a valuable resource. And then kind of the newest drone to hit the market that I have a feeling will kind of take over are these hybrid drones, also known as VTOL drones. They're vertical takeoff and landing, that can take off straight up and down and then kind of convert themselves to a fixed wing. They're rather expensive right now, but I think that's kind of where drone development is heading. Prices vary depending on the drone. That's kind of the rabbit hole you can go down to, but I'm happy to answer any questions later on kind of what is the best fit. But those are really the four kind of main types of drones that you're going to find.
Great. And another sort of broad question, but so what types of programs or software do you, our experts, use with your drones, and what do you use them for?
I'll go here. I use a handful of programs. The first thing that I use in almost all of my processing is Lightroom, just in case I need to tweak anything or make something less exposed or more exposed. That's usually a pretty quick process. It can be, at least. And Pix4D is the processing software that I use. I know there's different photogrammetry programs out there, but I've used Pix4D. It's a really good, powerful program. And on the back end, I use Cloud Compare a little bit and ArcGIS Pro. Pix4D, I should add, Pix4D can create DEMs, and from the point clouds, it can create DEMs and DTMs and contours, but I usually prefer to do that in ArcGIS Pro. I think the data is better. Once you have the point clouds, you can import point clouds from Pix4D to GIS to generate those products, and that's my preference.
Danny or Amanda, do you have any other programs that you guys use that you want to highlight?
Oh, Danny, go ahead.
I use, I've kind of switched to the DJI Terra platform. That's mainly because it streamlines the process with DJI sensors. But I also do analysis in QGIS, mainly because it's free. And then Amanda, you can probably speak on the other ones that we use.
Yep, I use Agisoft Metashape, which does the image stitching and also makes a point cloud, and then it makes those surface models. And then I usually use ArcGIS Pro for the GIS end afterwards. Also to mention that we need software for mission planning and mission flying. Sometimes that's two different types of software. And that's going to depend on the drone that you have and the kind of mission that you need to fly. And the kind of mission that you need to fly depends on the area you need to cover, how much detail you need, what kind of detail you need, and what kind of sensor you're using. So there are a bunch of those different things that will go into your decision depending on what it is you want to use it for.
Great, thank you guys. And
Can I add one thing to that?
please, yes.
Yeah. In the last couple of years, before like a year or two ago, it was really hard to get software, or at least a flight planning program that would enable you to follow terrain. Sometimes that's important if you have, a project area that has a lot of elevation change. And just recently, there's been a few programs that have gotten really good at that, and I just started using one of those last year. I think it's I can't recall it off the top of my head, but when I remember, I'll post it. It's really helpful if any of you have stuff in areas where there's a bit of elevation change, so you can kind of, you know, instead of staying at 200 feet, it'll be 200, you know, 200 feet above your home point is the way it used to be. It'll follow the terrain and be always above, you know, 200 feet or whatever your desired elevation above ground is. It'll follow the contours.
That's great. Thank you. And it looks like kind of the next question, and then we also had a question in the chat, which was, what do you use ArcGIS Pro with? And the next question was kind of how do these programs or can drone work interface with other common programs in this field, like ArcGIS Pro, which I think we touched on a little bit, but if anybody wants to elaborate on that a little more.
So I can. So once you have stitched your drone imagery, then it will be geo-referenced, and you can export, for example, a GeoTIFF of your stitched images as an orthomosaic, and it'll have whatever bands you have collected. So if it's true color, it'll be red, green, blue, and then you can bring that into your GIS or other image analysis software as a multi-band image. Also with the one that I use, and I'm not sure about the others, you can calculate an index if anyone's familiar with that. So you can do a little bit of math with the different information that you have in those bands, and then you can export that out as a single band raster if you're familiar with that. Also, it's depending on how advanced your drone is and how specific you need that geolocation to be, there are some additional steps you can do to collect GPS data on the ground with targets or areas that won't change from one flight to the next. And you can use that to measure change over time and have a more accurate georeferencing. I know that the drone that Danny primarily uses has that built in, and so he doesn't have to do that extra step of measuring locations on the ground.
I'm just curious, Danny, is that RTK enabled drone that you have? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What is it?
The drone?
Yeah.
It's the Matrice 300 RTK.
Okay. Thanks.
And I'll add one more in there too. I haven't done any specific research with it. I've just messed around, but if you've heard of Fiji, or I'm blanking on the other name of it, but there's some machine learning integration in there and some segmentation that I can put my images into. I mean, it'll stitch them, it'll do all of that, but there's the machine learning component of that is built into that program. So that's another kind of software freeware that I use on some of the images.
Great. Thank you, guys. Oh, come on. There we go. All right, so costs and funding, which I know that this could potentially be a rabbit hole, but there were a lot of questions on this. What is a general range of costs for sort of getting started? Cost of drones, cost of getting certified, purchasing the programming, that kind of a thing. If there's maybe kind of like a minimal and like the stars are the limit kind of budget, if anybody could help give us a range, maybe that would be helpful to folks. And then if folks have more specific questions, they can ask at the end.
Yeah, I think this is a really tough question, because you can spend anywhere from, let's just say $500 up to hundreds of thousands of dollars on a drone if you want to. It really depends on the application, what you need to use it for. Do you need multiple sensors? You know, I think it's really hard to answer. At the base, right, you're going to need to pay for your Part 107, especially if you're doing research. You know, and then it just kind of spirals out of control. So depending on what kind of drone you want, what kind of processing software you want, you know, are you going to go all free, or are you going to have to pay? You know, I'll use DJI as an example for what I do, but everything within DJI costs money. So, you know, you're going to expect to pay a little more versus Parrot or Unique, where they have all integrated systems that the drone actually comes with. I'm not sure for Parrot, but I know Unique, it's all integrated. So you might pay a little more upfront for the drone, but the kind of the back end stuff doesn't cost any money. So yeah, the range is wide, and it just totally depends on what you're using it for and what kind of quality you want out of the drone and post-processing.
Great.
I would, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jason.
No, you go. Go ahead, Amanda, sorry.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, generally, it's not that it's not one drone purchase is the be all end all. So, you know, if you're going to get started, it might be okay to start out with a really low budget setup and try it out and just have a standard true color camera and take before and after pictures and stitch them with freeware, and then kind of see how that goes, unless you're really sure that you're going to need to do these high precision measurements over time or collect other kinds of data. That's a really good way to start out. And then from there, then if you have your certification and you have, you know, you're building knowledge, then you can kind of ramp up to the next level if you feel like you need to. But one of the drones that I use for research, we got refurbished on Amazon for $500. It's a Parrot Anafi. This tiny little drone you can launch with your hand and catch. So you don't even need like a nice flat space to fly it. You can carry it around in your lap in the car and jump out and fly and you know, stitch your images, and takes really nice pictures, and it's pretty reliable. And, you know, so something like that could be a really low cost investment to start with. And then if you crash it, it's not the end of the world. That was just my thought, is that it doesn't have to be a decision, a huge decision up front, what kind of drone and sensor to go with necessarily.
I should add that the Part 107, last time I took it was $150. It might be more now. Plan on that being around a couple $100. The drone that I use is a DJI Phantom 4 Pro. I've been using that for 5 years, and it's been a real workhorse for me. I realize that it's not appropriate for all applications, but I know surveying companies that use this, you know, obviously to produce survey grade material for engineers and architects. So it is very capable, a very capable drone. And that was probably around 2000 when you add all the batteries. You can get one that's refurbished for cheaper. The first one I bought was refurbished and was closer to $1,000 5 years ago. Pix4D, a yearly license, I can't remember off the top of my head what it costs, maybe at least $3,000 a year, but there's, I believe there's free software out there. I've never used it. Amanda, maybe you know about that. There's also, I use a GNSS receiver. It's by Bad Elf. It's called the Bad Elf Flex, which is about $3,000. I use that to measure my ground control points, but that's for just getting a little more precise data and having repeatability. But maybe if you're just looking for orthos, maybe you don't need that precision. You can get XYZ data from the drone itself. Perhaps Danny or Amanda could speak more to that, but I use that receiver that taps into kind of the reference network in Washington State to get corrected data to just make my point clouds more accurate, essentially. So.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I know it's kind of a broad question, but anything else to add on pricing for like general costs or different types of drones or anything like that before we move on?
I think it'd be easier if people had specific questions, because again, I think it's such a broad range.
Great. Yeah, no worries. All right. Well, that was kind of the main questions that I got from almost everybody that registered. I would say had at least like one of those top questions that was in there. And with that, I'd like to open it up to a general Q&A. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here, and we have quite a bit of a smaller crowd than I was initially anticipating. So I would say maybe folks can either add their questions to the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, there should be an option if you go to reactions to raise your hand, and then I can call on you if you want to verbally ask it. So yeah, please ask any questions that you have for our experts, or if you have a more specific questions regarding price points or programs or anything like that, please feel free to shoot them in the chat now. And I'm seeing somebody left in the chat that it was 240 when I took it last year. I'm assuming this is in reference to the Part 107 test. I'm seeing that. Okay, great. Yeah.
I also have some images that I could share if folks just want to see if that would help to stimulate questions, or I'm sure the others do too.
I think that would be great. And I have one question that's in there, but maybe maybe do you want to share that, and then I can just hop back in and we can start with Reese's question after you share your images, Amanda?
Oh, sure. So actually, these are some images that I showed at the Eastern Washington Riparian Planting Symposium earlier this year. So on the right, I don't know if y'all can see my cursor or not, but on the right, that's an image showing a riparian area with willow trees, and you can see the cropland has turned brown. Adjacent to that, the road is brown. So this was kind of the end of the growing season when the riparian areas really pop out. Let's see. These are examples of a couple different drone setups I've used. On a low budget study, we actually used pool noodles and just crossed them to use as our ground control points, and we read the GPS measurements from those. And the one with the green propellers, that was a consumer grade drone. So we were able to use that to collect images like this. So here you see it's a bunch of regular color RGB images stitched together and then overlaid over a terrain model. So this is in a canyon. And so you can kind of see the canyon walls and then the trees and shrubs along the riparian area. So here we collected a lot of images, flew in different directions at different heights and angles to try to get the best three-dimensional model that we could get. Another example is here. This was getting pretty much as far into the fall as I would go because the shadows are getting pretty big. But on the upper left, you can see the reed canary grass, unfortunately mounded along the creek, and then some trees on either side. You can see trees of different ages. So the gray, black, white, and gray image shows the heights, kind of heights and density. And then you can see the true color, what it looks like. It was the beginning of October in that year. And then the color infrared image is kind of muted because it's late in the growing season, but we can use, that's a multispectral sensor. We can use that to get at photosynthesis and how active the plants are at different times of year. For a better example of that, I'll show you the same picture I showed before, which was the riparian area with willows and of course reed canary grass, and some shrubs in there too. So the color infrared image shows the brighter red is the more active vegetation. Similarly, that NDVI in the upper right, the brighter white is more active vegetation. And then this other index in the lower right, NDRE, is using different information. So again, this is a sensor that has 5 different bands instead of just red, green, and blue. It also has near infrared and red edge bands. So that enables us to get a little bit more of the vegetation structure and how active it is at different times of year. So just to give folks some idea, I won't take any more time with that.
Yeah, thank you. And that was perfect. It seems like we have a good amount of questions that came in now. So Our first question is from Reese, and they are curious about quiet propellers for noise and whether or not these works. Also tips, tricks for being wildlife safe.
In terms of quiet propellers, I've never dealt with them, but I assume if they're selling them, they work. I don't know the difference, but my drone is already relatively quiet as is. I know, well, Jason can probably attest that the Phantom 4 RTK is pretty high pitched, and some of the older drones can be noisy, but they seem to have kind of figured out that issue. I mean, obviously there's still noise, but tips and tricks for being wildlife safe. I've had a couple instances, for instance, in Alaska, juvenile seagulls would actually slap the top of my drone with their feet because they were curious. And then we've also had some bird issues. Wildlife safe. So the rule of thumb, at least that I've read, is that when a bird is flying at your drone, you generally want to fly straight up in the air because they're not going to attack from below. And then as soon as they kind of disperse, you drop it as fast as you can. The other trick I've learned is that you actually put like the googly eyes on top of your drone to try and mimic a bird or a bigger bird than what they are. I tried putting reflective tape on my drone, but most of those reflective tapes have metal in them. So you get magnetic interference with the drone and that can kind of screw it up. So I've never had any big issues, but osprey tend to be the most interested in the drone, and then juvenile birds that don't know any better. But you know, I think you just kind of run the risk of that birds are going to be interested in it. But I've never had any major issues other than the seagulls.
That's cool. Thanks. I went ahead and put myself on speaker. So, and then any incident with running into birds, or is that something that you're generally able to say? Because we're a wildlife organization, so we want to be careful that we're not causing harm when we're out there.
Yeah, I've had some scares with osprey, and then again the seagulls. I've never run into birds or had birds necessarily attack the drone. I know it's happened. There was that big story with, I think, US Fish and Wildlife, where they had the eagle attack their drone up in Lake Michigan or up there. It's unavoidable. I mean, there's no way to control. You can do your best to watch the birds and hope they don't attack it. You can try and fly straight up in the air or lower it, but unfortunately, I think birds are curious, and so they may go after it, they may not.
Okay, cool. Thank you for your thoughts here. And Amanda, your head nodding too is helpful.
One other thought, if there are certain species you know of in the area and you know their patterns, you could try to fly at a time when they're not very active. Like I would avoid the time when the thermals are rising for various reasons, or, you know, that sort of thing.
Great, thank you.
I'd also be careful, especially careful during nesting season. It's just a matter of scanning the area and see if there's any nests, and particularly raptor nests around. So that's where you can get into trouble. But in the hundreds of missions I've flown, and a lot of them are, you know, on reservoir or river type habitats, I've never had any issues.
Okay, that's
Sometimes
great.
I'll see a raptor checking it out, and they'll take off. So,
thank you.
but just be aware, especially during the breeding season.
And I should also add that Danny, Amanda, and Jason all have hosted in-person workshops for us. And I thought it was at your field trip, Jason, you had mentioned that sometimes just having another person on the ground to kind of help monitor the surroundings while you're kind of looking down at the drone and stuff. So again, not a drone expert, but I thought I remembered that being passed out just to kind of have somebody else to help you look at the surroundings. All right.
I wanted to show, just real quick, show a couple of products that I've done with the Phantom 4.
Sure.
Phantom 4 Pro 2.0, just so people are curious. Give me a second here. I'm hardly ever on Zoom, so
no worries.
Bear with me.
No worries.
So
I can ask.
See that? Can you all see that?
Oh, I think it's just taking, there we go. Yes.
Okay,
You know.
so I think it was Cascade Fisheries Group asked me to fly. It's called a project called the Fishassen Reconnect, and this is just an ortho mosaic of I think it's about 37 acres. Can't quite remember. Let me take a peek at the it is 31 acres, and sorry, it's about 750 photos. That's kind of one of the simpler applications. And then I'm helping the state with a give me a second here, a beaver analog project, beaver dam analog project. And this is where we went last week. Can you see I changed it to the DEM. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay. So I flew this last year before they did the beaver dam analog. This is a digital elevation model that is essentially, it's derived from a point cloud that is created once you stitch your photos together in any of these programs that you can use, Pix4D, or I can't recall the one that you use, Amanda, but this is the digital elevation model before the restoration work. And then from that DEM, you can get contours, and there's the contour map of that area. And this is where we were at. Some of you were there last week, West Foster Creek in Douglas County.
Very cool. Great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
It's cool having been to that field trip to see the data from it. We have a couple more questions. Oops, where'd we go? It looks like we have, what kind of programs do you have at your university or agency? Training program, safety program, written SOPs, etc. And they have a second question that's unrelated that I'll come into next.
For all of the agencies that I do work with, it's all follow the FAA regulations, with the exception of Washington State, which requires us to have liability insurance while we're flying in case of an accident. But there's no additional rules beyond the FAA that we have to follow.
Okay. Great. And then their next question, unless Jason or Amanda had anything else to add to that, didn't seem like I'm seeing no's. Okay. Was, have you had altercations with individuals on the ground who do not want you flying your drones over them or their property, despite your flying being legal? And if so, how have you dealt with this? Do you have a response program for situations like this?
I guess I can. Amanda's laughing. Yes, I've had multiple altercations, unfortunately, and I think it's anyway. Yeah, I've had issues. I was legally flying, but sometimes people just don't like drones. So depending on where you're flying, there's kind of the big brother. They think you're taking images of stuff that you don't want them to, or you're flying over them. You're perfectly legal. How do you deal with it? Well, it depends on the situation and the severity of it. You know, oftentimes once you explain to people what you're doing, it turns into, oh wow, that's super cool, or it gets escalated and you have to hide behind a tree. So it just depends on the situation. My rule of thumb is just try your best to talk to everybody that could potentially be where the drone is flying. You know, in certain places, for instance, in Idaho, where it's dispersed camping and it's all, you know, it's hard to do. But I think it's still just a good rule of thumb to talk to people. And then I don't have a response program, but I think to Jason's point, and Amanda and Corey, you mentioned it as well, but it's just a good rule of thumb to have another person out there with you. Barbara said she's been shot at several times. I hope not at you. I hope it was the drone. But I've also had a gun pulled on me, I think 2 or 3 times now. So have a second person out there with you. I kind of expect to have an angry person every time I fly, unfortunately, but I've gotten a lot better at dealing with it. And then, yeah, just, do your best to contact anybody you might come across and have a second person with you. I'm happy to answer more questions on how I dealt with that, but I don't really want to get into details. So.
Just a couple things to add, since I have flown on private property before. So we had a memorandum of understanding between us and the conservation district. The conservation district then linked us with people, and then I met with them and gave them a form to sign, a permission form. And then I always had all those papers with me and in the car, so I could show that I had permission to be there and who I was, wear my WSU hat. And then also, particularly for working on public lands, figuring out who people would call if they saw a drone flying and they would call somebody, and talking to them first so that they have our contact info, they know what we're doing. So if someone calls them, so like the local police or the ranger district or whoever it is, and so far, knock on wood, I have not had as many hours flying as these other folks on the expert panel, but I haven't had any issues flying in Washington, Idaho, Montana.
Yeah, we send out a press release. We contact every agency that could be called. So yeah, just know who you're flying over, and know who they're going to call if you do fly over them.
I guess I've been fortunate so far in that I haven't had any problems at all. Most of what I do is on public land, if not all of it. So far, so good. But I think it is good, like Amanda said, to have a plan in place, and an MOU sounds really good too.
Great, thank you guys. And it looks like we had a couple kind of like some questions that are stitched together. So Alexander had said perhaps there are some questions about sensor types and applications, thermal, RGB, LiDAR, red edge, etc. And I'm trying to see. And then Reese said yes to this question. And then they said LiDAR and VDI. I don't know if anybody has anything to add or comments on that.
I can add about LiDAR. I haven't used any of the other sensors, but we're actually looking at getting a LiDAR, a drone, an M300, like Danny uses with a LiDAR sensor. That would allow us to do work that, especially in like transmission lines where we need to get imagery, not imagery, but models of lattice work or wires, and in riparian applications where there's a lot of vegetation. I think the LiDAR could be really good in those applications. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I have a LiDAR and I've flown with it. They're great. They're all, I don't know if there's specific questions, but if you're looking to make models or DEMs, it's just super streamlined and they're fun to fly. I can show examples if someone wants to see them of what the models look like compared to, say, structure for motion. But yeah, I don't. If there's any specific questions, I'm happy to answer it.
It looks like Reese would love to see an example, and I'm sure other folks maybe would too. If that's easy for you to do right now, Danny.
Yeah. Let's see.
And maybe I can just fill in a little bit. I don't know where folks are with what they've done here, but structure from motion, you can recreate the surface with just true color imagery, but it's fairly intensive on the processing side. So there, the equipment doesn't cost as much, but you need to put the time, you need to have the really good GPS measurements on the ground and so on. Versus LiDAR with Danny's setup, he can fly it really quickly. He can get models instantly. It gives more information about what's at the points, not just the height at the points. But right now the equipment is a lot more expensive.
Great, thank you.
It's getting cheaper though. In the last year, the price point has really come down. And I imagine it's only going to get better.
Yeah, so this is the LiDAR of an area out near Spokane. I think it took me about 4 minutes to capture all of this, and then an additional 4 minutes to process it. So it's super quick. And you can get just a basic RGB model from it, as you can see, but you can also look at height, as well as, you know, your returns and reflectivity. What I will say that differs, and if you're not familiar, like Amanda said, I'll show you kind of the structure for motion after this, but if you need detail, right, if you need a detailed model, structure for motion may be the way to go. And I'll just show you, if I can find it here. So this is structure for motion, and it's highly detailed and could be more detailed, depending on the images you wanted to take. So yet to be determined on the accuracy of the height and whatnot, but this is just a good example of the difference between a LiDAR model and then a structure for motion model. So this is, I can show you real quick. So this is the images it took. And then if you look at these triangles, it's kind of hard to see, but this is the direction the camera was at when it took those images. So the camera actually swings left and right as it's flying, to capture it from different angles. And again, this is with a DJI drone where it's specifically made for this sort of application. But yeah, that's the difference there.
Danny, you're using DJI's LiDAR sensor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Danny. This is Reese says super helpful. Thank you as well. And then we had another question from Alexander. Do you think there is interest in a drone training course? If so, I'm sure Danny and Amanda would love to teach it. Yeah, I guess I don't know if that's a question just in general to the audience or in Amanda and Danny's availability and interest in teaching anything like that. That's sort of how this webinar formed to be, just because from a Populus perspective, people who've attended our past events have had a really high interest in drones, since we've had 2 field trips over the summer. And then that's also sort of why this webinar kind of formed into a Q&A, just because there's so much interest and so many different questions. And so rather than having a presentation, I was hoping this would help answer folks' questions on getting started. But if anybody has anything to add to that, I would love your guys' thoughts. Or if there's already a course like this that exists somewhere, maybe. I'm hearing crickets, so maybe.
I don't know of anything that exists that's specific to this setting that we're all familiar with here. And I also don't know, it kind of depends on what the situation is for each person. It might be that one-on-one consulting might work better. We may be at the point where people really just want to talk about, well, what's the best thing for me and how do I get up and running, as opposed to something more generalizable. So I'm just not sure. We can do that too. We are available. Danny and I are in the same lab at WSU.
Great. I guess so. Maybe a better question would be, could I share contact information for our drone experts with the attendees today if they have any more specific questions? And you can answer that privately if you would like at the end, if you're not sure or need to think about that. But yeah, it seems like a lot of the general questions that people have kind of been answered, and because things are so variable, maybe something like that might be a little bit more helpful for folks. we'll stay tuned for that. If I,
Yeah,
oh,
share my information. If people have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to help where I can. So
thanks, Danny.
Same here. Happy to help.
Thank you, Jason.
Yep, for sure.
Thank you, Amanda. Great. All right. All right. Sorry, I'm just. Oh, great. And then Reese is just adding, this has been very helpful and an idea of what's possible. And thank you all for your time. And with that, lovely thank you comment. Thank you, Reese. That is 12 o'clock. I am happy to stick around if there are any last minute conversations folks want to have. I'm glad that this was really helpful. I know it was sort of a loose structure, but hopefully this kind of helped you kind of pinpoint the things that you were really curious about, or helped maybe give you a direction of kind of where to go from here. And with that, I am going to add to the chat right now, or rather Merritt is going to add to the chat a little post survey. So if before folks leave, if you could take like 2 minutes to fill that out, just to kind of let us know what you thought of this and give us ideas for other kind of trainings and stuff. It really helps us make these events more helpful for you all, which is, you know, why we do what we do. We're trying to help other conservation and riparian restoration professionals. And yes, yeah, thank you all. Thank you for all the thank you comments. And thank you so much to Jason, Amanda, and Danny for taking time out of your schedules to lead the field trips this summer, for helping with this Q&A, providing all of your resources, helping share your work that you've been doing. I just really greatly appreciate all of your time, energy, and expertise that went into these events. So thank you all so much.
thank you all. I gotta run, but I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Danny.
Thanks. I need to sign off too, but feel free to email with questions.
Thanks, Amanda. All right.